What's up, y'all, and welcome to the Idea Space. I'm Yancey Strickler. Hank Willis Thomas is a conceptual artist working primarily with themes related to perspective, identity, commodity, media, and popular culture. His work is challenging, funny, and alive in deep and visceral ways. Hank is a frequent public artist with major pieces in cities and parks globally, work in the Museum of Modern Art, Guggenheim, and Whitney, and many solo shows at major institutions around the world. In addition to his work as an individual artist, Hank operates in many other contexts, including creative activism, from putting up billboards in all 50 states to reviving an Abraham Lincoln-era political movement for the 2020 U.S. election. I admire Hank as someone who truly embodies the bento. He operates in multiple dimensions at once, pairing a phenomenal personal practice with work that widens the lens, involves and invites public collaboration, and speaks to a larger us. In one of my favorite Idea Space conversations so far, Hank and I had a reflective, sensitive, and strikingly honest discussion of his work, the impossibility of defining Black male identity, and how to operate as an infinite player inside a finite game.
So we know each other, socially, not super well,
hmm
but we have a lot of life connections. And, I wanted to talk to you because I think of you as someone who really, to use my kind of language, who embodies the bento. You've got like a great individual practice to your work, like amazing work. I've spent the past month like really living in your work and just am so moved. Um, but you always like widen the lens, look beyond the West, like look beyond your culture, kind of see the language. You're always adjusting that lens, and you're also always speaking to this larger us, whether it's as a Black American, whether it's like the political work you're doing now. And so all those things to me are like, there's just a lot of dimensions in which I feel you operate. And that's kind of what made me curious to talk to you and just to think about what you're thinking about. And so, just my first question is, just what's on your mind right now? What's going on today?
well, what's on my mind? I hear sirens, um, and it reminds me of this time last year where in New York City there were sirens blaring 24/7, basically because of the overwhelming um, nature of the coronavirus pandemic. First having impact on our healthcare system. That's what I'm thinking about right now.
Yeah, yeah, right now. We were talking right before the call started about our ages. You are 46, you said 45, 45. I'm 42. Um, and I've been thinking about my age a bit lately because I'm seeing people that I think of as peers in like real positions of power or influence. And it strikes me that our age group is like coming into its own and is like a maybe like an early peak of our lives or something. And I wonder where you think about yourself being in terms of life or even like, just this process of manifesting ideas.
Yeah, well, I am definitely in a moment in a phase of basically redefinition, re-examination, which I think is not uncommon during this pandemic. I think also for someone who is entering middle age. um, and I'm looking at things like your book and the ways in which some people have kind of built philosophies and principles around their lives that they can now kind of that are almost functioning as a rule book that um, are a pathway for the future, and wondering if it's time or near time for me to begin to talk about an ethos of my work in practice, not so much for others, but as much as it is for myself. And yeah, that's definitely, and I think there's also a connection, an element or a necessity for intellectual, spiritual, and emotional kind of growth that comes with this transition into a new phase of life where I have a daughter. I am in my mid 40s. I'm not able to just like zip around the world and do whatever I want without there being real consequences. And so, in a way, it's like a new lease on life.
Yeah, I've been thinking about it as like it's the start of a new part of life. But it's been weird. You said the phrase middle age, which I didn't say, but that phrase I've been working around and thinking about a lot the past few weeks. What you mentioned, like a rule book or guidebook, playbook. Like, what have you been guided by something up to this point? Like, what's gotten you to this point where you are right now?
Well, when you say this point,
Well, I guess when I say that, I mean I don't know where you are as an artist. I imagine if like 17-year-old you saw where you are today, they'd probably feel pretty happy. But I like wonder what has guided you, or like, or is it just you're just responding to what's in front of you? I don't know. How do you think about it?
well, if I think if 17-year-old me saw me now, he would wonder why I wasn't happier. And that, I'm asked the question of, you know, how I got here, if we can have a level of success and validation and opportunity and comfort through your work, through your friendships, through life choices, and still not be like optimum happiness, I think that's where I start to really wonder, what have I been doing? I'm not unhappy, um, but am I like living in my essence? I'm not sure. And I think that does fall into this kind of chasing external kind of validation and external kind of references or kind of objects that suppose or present or security. And and that pursuit is an endless pursuit, because when you don't have the internal security and the internal comfort and the internal validation, you how could it be fulfilled outside? And it's not something I was consciously doing, but when I hear your question, it's like, you know, what would 17-year-old me say?
Yeah,
It'd be
for
like,
real.
dude, you just did that.
I know. I think probably like both 44-year-old, 45-year-old Hank could give a lot of perspective to 17-year-old Hank, and probably vice versa too.
Yeah. Well, I just say it's not gonna get much better than this. Maybe not that much worse, but you know, just enjoy it. Just don't be so stressed out.
When you say things like that to yourself, do you listen? Like, what does that work? Do things work for you?
I I think whatever I say to myself works. That's why I want to be conscious of what I say to myself, right? I've come to realize that the story that I tell myself about any moment in my life becomes the dominant narrative, and I would love to master the art of telling the best story I can tell for my own kind of and collective kind of advancement.
I saw in some of this stuff with the Wide Awake project that you have been doing. You referenced James Carson's work, Finite and Infinite Games, and I wonder how that reading that connects you with like the external validating kind of goals, or how you think about your life, say in relation to a book like that.
Yeah, so I came across the book, Finite and Infinite Games, in a vision of life as play and possibility that was written in 1986 by James Cars, who was a theologian and I guess at that point maybe somewhat novice game theorist, perhaps, I don't know. Um, but he was a person who had spent and has spent, he passed away just last year, uh, most of his life in search of, if not meaning, but in search of like excellence in in life, and that is very much about the game of life. And in the book, he talks about there being two kinds of games: finite games, which are games that come to an end when someone has won, and infinite games, which have the object of the game being continuing to stay in a state of play. And so I hybridize that to say that finite games are for winners and losers, and infinite games are for the players. And I recognize that me, and I think I talked, I projected this onto you, uh, and a lot of people that I have come to admire are game players stuck in a finite game. So that like we are always playing outside of the rules of the game and making up our own rules, and actually in a active process of play, but um, are somehow still obeying or abiding by the boundaries of the finite game that our society has created for us. And when we recognize, this is my story, so when I recognize that, like, oh, I can, if I'm really playing this game to just stay in the state of play, it doesn't matter how old I am, it doesn't matter who I'm with, it doesn't matter how much I have or how much I don't have or where I am, as long as I am actually in creativity and in movement, um, with my thoughts and my energy. And that kind of that was the beginning of an awakening for me about um, embracing my power.
Do you work in a structured way? Has that evolved a lot over time?
um, I think it is. I work in a structured chaos. It's like I think if, well, at least within my life, there are patterns and there are kind of methodologies that really come up from just kind of riding the wave and watching uh, the kind of same opportunities and same obstacles come up in different forms, and then kind of navigating through them, which is it doesn't seem like it's a structure, but I think I've created these grooves where like, oh, I created that problem. Oh, I created that success. And so there's like there is a method to the madness that even people who have worked with me for a long time see after a while.
If you like when your work goes in another direction for a project, like say you're doing textiles for a project and you want to learn about something new, like how do you dive into something you haven't done before? Do you just do you talk to people? Do you just have the kind of brain that figures it out? Do you like how do you think about things like that?
I like to know where things can. I like to know where things can go wrong. So I really am very big on kind of not learning too much about how it's done, just learning how not to break it. And so whenever I think about something new, I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And I see that it's been done this way for a long time. What happens if you do this thing that hasn't been done or isn't, you're not supposed to do? Does that ruin the whole thing, or does that just open a new door? And that's where I think I spend most of my energy in, as a creative, in is kind of tinkering and retooling uh, ideas and practices and techniques that have been well weathered, but not with such a kind of rough and playful hand.
When when we were setting up this conversation, I got a text from you saying something like that you get back to me in a week or two because you only check your email that often or something like that, which just made me wonder what is your online life like? How do you relate to the internet?
Well, I think I tend to say yes to things, which I don't know how to not. So I just delay my yeses by not just opening up my inbox and saying yes to everything at once. Say yes to a bunch of things, and then don't say anything for a couple weeks, and then say yes to a bunch of things. Um, I have a great relationship with the internet. I am also trying to have a great relationship with myself, and I don't believe you can do both at the same time. So, me and the internet are not dating. We're actually in a very uh, committed, loving relationship, uh, which myself has issues with, and maybe is a little jealous.
Totally, totally. I, how are you, like you as a collaborator? Yeah, because you have collaborated on a lot of things. You got to bring probably a different version of yourself maybe to the studio if someone else is there versus just you. Like, what is the collaborative energy? Or is that just like some things to execute them you don't have all the hands or brains that you need to do it?
Well, I think my studio practice is also pretty collaborative. It's just that I get more of the credit and more of the criticism. um, in a lot of ways, I'm more invested in my publicly build collaborative projects because it requires more. It require to earn and maintain the trust of other people and to make something real that has the hands of a committee on them, and to hold it is a pretty strenuous journey. That's what I love about the bento, where which I haven't fully mastered, but the conversation around it is really how if we could start with this idea, like everyone being really transparent of the now me and the future me and the now us and the future us, like how would we actually then collaborate? And that's why I think um, was it this could be our future
Yeah.
is like a really beautiful kind of metaphor for everything that I believe in. That it's not about me; it's about us, and I want to be there, not alone.
Right, right. There's on some of the wide awake stuff. So wide awakes was like at first a Lincoln era political movement of like young revolutionary progressive, like the world can be better kind of people. And then you and a bunch of great people brought the idea back in 2020 and sort of did voter drives, other activism around this myth of wide awakes and making it present again. And there was on a banner in one of the marches, there was a line that said, "Individually we are asleep, together we are wide awake." And I wondered, what does that line mean to you?
Well, one of the many people involved in this, Tony Patrick, actually is the one who said that. And I mean, well, he said it slightly different, but someone else must have heard it and they made it. I mean, it's every moment that I have with another person is a shared moment. Like you and I are making reality together, and someone, I hope, is hearing us make reality together. And we often don't wake up to our aliveness unless we, unless and until we are interacting with another person. And when we both approach that with the awareness, with the gratitude, and respect that it deserves. That's the magic of life. I mean, you and I have experienced it, but like when you like get to that point with another person where we're like, we are alive and we're vibing, we're like together, we're awake, and I'm not thinking about like the kind of the sleepwalking element of like, I have to go do this, I have to go like the things that feel obligatory and rather than generative. And so I mean, that's my interpretation of it. But what I love about the wide awakes as it's grown, and I've kind of been sitting back a little bit to see as it's there are a lot of people, a lot of whom I don't know that are kind of doing this, and we're wondering, I think, about what it means to not have boundaries in a collective. The collective is also about the boundary, but if the boundary, if the barrier for entry is just seeing seeing that you're part of the collective, how much stronger is it? Is what I think it's about. Like when I see you and you see
Mm.
me, what do we then do together?
Mm. What for you, what does it feel like to be an artist? Are you are you always an artist? Is that like a jacket you put on sometimes?
I feel the title artist is a sham. I don't know how to paint or draw, and that's what I thought artists do. And I studied photography, but then now everyone is a photographer, so I'm just like an average Joe or Hank, just your average Hank. So I always introduce myself as a person, you know, um, because, and it's inspired by a quote by James Baldwin, which I hope I get correct. He says, "The artist's struggle for his integrity must be considered as a metaphor for the struggle which is universal and daily for all human beings to get to become human beings." And what I take that apart is this, that the artists struggle to be their best self in their art form, and the master of that craft is literally the same as the struggle for each and every one of us to be the best person that we can be. And if my artistry is really a metaphor for my personhood, is it aren't they the same thing, because they are both creative making practices, right? And that it's only as good as the attention and the energy put into it. And so I think a lot of the way that we've actually colonized humanity through the kind of marginalization of us from saying, you're an artist, you're a consumer, you're a tech person, actually limits us from being the whole people we are. Remember, in other societies and other moments in human existence, everyone was an artist. Like that's just like, it's not about can you dance, it's will you or do you. Um, you know, there, and so that's where I think if we can get back into this idea that our daily lives are acts of creativity, imagine how governments can change. Imagine how the world can change.
Mm. So, a lot of your work has sports in it, which is kind of atypical for quote unquote, serious art. Is that like is that just like you like that is the context of your life? That's what you're interested in. You see art and everything. Is that like is that just sort of you naturally being you and that's what comes out?
I've never been good at sports, so that's probably part of it. And being a Black American male, when I grew up, and not being good at sports and being named Hank, even though it was Hank Aaron, was just not a cool thing, you know. And I had to spend a lot of excess energy trying to prove my worth outside of machismo. And there were others, my cousin Sunga, who passed away, who were really good at everything that they did and found it not fulfilling. And this, I remember one time he said, what he didn't like about playing sports that he was really good at was in order, because I asked him why he quit. He was like, he had a promising basketball career and he quit, and I asked him why he lost interest. And he was like, I had to look, in order for me to be good at my job, I would have to look someone in the eye and make them doubt themselves and then do something to make them feel bad about themselves. And he's like, I just could never do that. Um, that had a real impact on me about like what the finite game of competition, I'm a winner, you're a loser, does to human beings. So there's that, but then there's also the reality that for many African Americans, the first glimpse of opportunity in the United States was through sports and entertainment because it was a playing field, so to speak, that you can prove yourself on. And what the beauty of this infinite game is that you had these, again, infinite game players in the finite game, but they were playing it. They were playing the infinite game, right? So they changed the style of play. They changed the rules of the game because they brought a level of passion and creativity to it that was about staying into the state of play, and that's where I think I subconsciously got really attracted to sports because there is so much that has been done through people like Muhammad Ali and Wilma Rudolph and just say the Williams sisters, like, who were at first a spectacle but then became the entirety of the movement. They then became a movement, so to speak, and for them to be the descendants of slaves whose spirits were expected to be crushed centuries ago, who still deep within them have this perseverance, is something that I'm forever kind of inspired and driven by.
You have so many great pieces with outstretched arms,
Hmm.
often in a sports context, but also in like a police context, social justice context. What are the arms in your work reaching for?
They sound cheesy, but they're reaching for you. Um, and they're reaching for your attention, but often they're actually just reaching for you. And that's what life is about. It's about reaching for me, about making also a connection to things we want and to things we care about, and then being able to hold them. And the metaphor of the ball in these things is like that is your potential in sports, right? Your whole potential is dependent on what you do with this ball and your mastery with it. And I think that is about like that can be a metaphor for your marriage, for your child, for your health, for your mental health, for your career. That ball is like in that moment, what do you do with it? And so within the work, I'm very I love playing with that moment where the ball is about to leave your hand and maybe achieve the goal, or it's about to be dropped, or someone else is trying to take it from you. Those are things that yeah, that I just love to play with.
Thinking of you have the piece, I think it's called Promise, which is like the Dwight Clark, the catch. It's like a hand
Hmm.
reaching, one hand catching a football. Going back to earlier, I wonder at the moment he's catching the football, does that person think, why am I not happier right now? In that moment, probably your conscious mind isn't there, but maybe, probably after the game, maybe that person is thinking
Yeah.
that. So I really loved. Um, I'm sorry, I didn't write that. Is it Question Bridge? Is that the name of?
Hmm.
Yeah, I really loved Question Bridge, which is black men asking and answering each other questions. Some of it looked like it was maybe scripted. A lot of it was just interviews. Um, can you talk about like what was the goal of that project and what did you walk away from that
Wow. Well, that actually was not scripted at all. So it was, and it, but you wonder, like even I being in a room for most of the conversations was like, did you prepare for that?
Well, I was thinking scripted in the sense you had people responding to the same question. It seemed like they're responding
Yeah.
to some of the same questions.
Well, what it was. So my collaborator and former professor Chris Johnson had done this project in the '90s where he wanted to facilitate a conversation across the class divide in the African American community in San Diego, and he felt that if you had people who saw themselves as different from each other sitting at the same table asking what might be seen as threatening questions, that it would quickly devolve into back and forth. And he thought that it might be more effective if he acted as a fairy, where someone could ask a question of someone that they felt that they were different from or they had an issue with, and he could go to find someone that fit that description and then like show them that question and then get that authentic answer back. So this idea of a video mediated discourse was something that he thought was exciting, and he did it I think in 1996, and around 2006 um, I found a VHS of it and was like, this is pretty interesting. To think about like I'd never had seen like people from just be as raw in their questions and their answers. Um, but also there being, for lack of a better word, a level of civility. And so I said to Chris, I would love to do question bridge around black men. And I wanted to do that because, I've been a black man my whole life and I can't define black male identity. And Chris is also a black male and has also struggled with the blackmail of race and gender as society has kind of imposed it on us. And Bayate Ross Smith, our other collaborator, also a black male. And then Kamal Sinclair, our fourth primary collaborator, is a mixed woman, half black, half white, if you believe in race. And we wound up on this journey where we would go to African American men and say, do you have we would go to self identified African American men and say, do you have a question for a black man that you feel different or strange from? And then they would pose a question to the video camera. And then we would take that camera, like, so someone said, uh, one of the, what's so cool about selling crack? And we were like, uh-oh, it's not a question you could just go show anybody. And what Chris did is he started to teach meditation in San Francisco County Jail to get access to people who could authentically answer that question. And so we wound up going about a year later into the jail and showing that and other questions like, do you really feel free, and what makes you better than someone else, or whatever, these other questions. And we were just shocked by the fact that you could take any question and there would be 5, 10 different answers. Our idea was like, okay, we're going to take the best questions and the best answers, and in reality they were just different. And that was a metaphor for what we really were thinking about in general, which is that there's as much diversity within any demographic as there is outside of it. And so when you have 5 black men answering the same question in 5 different ways, you start to say, oh, this container doesn't hold around this race identity because they're just different people who have a different perspective on life that cannot be predicated upon about based off of class or gender or skin color, kind of prejudiced. So for me, it was groundbreaking because I, as a black man, would often be like, okay, I know this person, I know what's behind this, and then like there was a guy, a young man in Hunters Point, who um, like dressed all hip hop style, maybe had some a grill, and he asked his question when he sat down was, um, "What does it feel like to watch someone lose their life?" And we were like, "Wow, that's a pretty profound question from a 16-year-old." And atypically, typically we just take the questions and we go find someone to answer them. But Chris asked, like, "So what? I'd love to know what's behind that question." He said, "Well, my mother has epilepsy, and every once in a while she has a seizure, and I'm always wondering, is she going to pass away? And like, what will I be? What will it feel like?" He's like, and then a few weeks ago, I was at the pool with my grandmother. She fell in, and then I had to like dive in from the other side of the pool, and I had to like swim all the way across the pool and like pull her out, and then like make sure she was breathing. And oh my god, I was so scared. And we're like, whoa, like we're thinking like you're a young black male, you think about police violence or community violence, but you're like think about your mother and your grandmother, and you can swim. Right. So like that, those kinds of experiences that we had very regularly were like, oh, I'm the total idiot that like if I don't know anything about what goes behind the surface or the veneer of a black male's experience, who does? And the truth is only that person, if they're even willing to look at that and even given the opportunity. And so the other part about Question Bridge is that when we ask someone a question, like you have done many here, and I'm holding back on mine, it is, it's a generous practice. You're saying, hey, I would love, I mean, it's giving someone an opportunity to share their gifts. Um, and I overheard someone a few years ago say that givers need takers. Um, and this exchange again is what I've always been drawn to in all of my work, where you have strangers opening themselves up to be vulnerable through asking a question, then other strangers answering those questions and making themselves vulnerable, and that being just this really magical thing.
It really is magical. I mean, I sat down yesterday for a half hour and watched, the excerpt you have of Question Bridge online. I didn't move a muscle the whole time. And, it really did make me think that like I don't know what a black man is. I like this is really I mean, I've never seen men answer questions like that, much less seen black men answer questions like that. And it was really profound to see that level of dialogue. And I don't know where that conversation's happening today. It might only be in projects like that, or when things are hard and you need somebody, maybe.
Mhm. And then yeah, and so I mean that's the thing. We really feel like the world needs healing dialogue. It needs methodologies that you're like really exploring and sharing that are that continue to center the us. You know.
So that's a nice transition to. I wanted to try a little bit of my practice with you in this conversation.
All right.
A little,
How much you
yeah.
charging? How much you going to charge me?
Well, you could pay me at the end.
All right. Cool.
You could tell me what it's worth to you. So, the bento. We know there's like the now me, what I need right now, future me. I think of it as like the Obi-Wan me that I'm becoming, that voice that talks back to me, my now us, the people in my life, the future us, the world that I want to have happen. And in the bento society, we do courses and experiences together, and there's one that we do called How to Read a Room as a Bentoist.
Hmm.
And the idea is that whenever you walk into like a room or a party, you want to know who's there, like who do I need to connect to, who should I hit up. But like the way a bentoist reads the room is to know that you walk into that room carrying a lot of different people, and
Hmm.
so does everybody else. And so the way a bentoist might want to introduce themselves is by thinking distinctly about who are all the people in your now me, who are all the people in your future me, and that when we all do that, we find all these other places to connect. Like our now me's might have nothing in common, but our future us's are like identical.
Hmm.
And in most conversations, there's like very little opportunity to find your way there.
Hmm.
So I thought as like a little practice, we could try, and you could tell me if you're game to just do this spur of the moment, if you'd want to write something down, but try to introduce ourselves to each other a little bit through how we would characterize these parts of ourselves. Um, so I'll go first to give you an example, but like if I think about my now me, the person that's like, just each day doing the work, I think there's like a hunter who's providing for his family, who's always got the eye out. There's like a bookworm that's always curious. There's the weirdo that can never fit in. And there's like, an animal that just like wants to beast out in a forest somewhere, and like all of those things are a part of like my now me at any given moment.
Hmm.
I wonder, do you have anything that comes alive for you as you think about that question for yourself?
Um, well, do I have any questions, or
So like who is your, yeah,
my
who would you, yeah,
yeah, my contrast, my now me is also a hunter, or my now me is a forager, uh, who is desperate to be loved, and uh, admired or celebrated for his foraging capacity, while also seen as suspect, um, because of the sorcery of it. Yeah, I'm an alchemist, and I refer to myself as have in the past as a visual culture archaeologist, because I'm constantly just kind of mining visual and popular culture to like, um, bring bear fruit.
that's awesome. Nice to meet you, now me, Hank. So now us, for me, my now us is my wife and child, um, my parents. I have two brothers. I've got like core friends around the world, people I've collaborated with, people I made Kickstarter with, my teachers, um, probably more than I would want, but my bullies are big in my now us. And God. I think God has always been part of my us. I wonder who you think of as being your us.
My now us is everyone who has ever lived, everyone who is currently living, and some of the people who will be living after this. Um,
Um,
yeah.
so future me. So if I like the person I'm trying to become, or the person who speaks back to me, I a little bit picture my grandfather, a person I think of as being a kind person. Um, but really, I imagine like a person that looks at me now with the same kind of compassion that I look at my adolescent self with, of like someone who's trying to do the best they can with what they know. And you can only do so well with the tools you have. And I think about being a person that can truly look at myself and look at others that way. What about you?
Well, my future me
Yeah.
is my future me is still on the path, looking back with a smile, and then looking forward with a long road ahead. And this smile is saying, look how far you've come. I see you, and uh, that you're stronger, you're more patient, you're more grateful, and more steady.
I like your future me. I like your future me. So my future us, I think about my kid being an adult, making adult decisions, which is terrifying to me on a lot of levels. Um, but I also think optimistically about a world where it's a world of abundance and where humanity is like a networked organism, something
Hmm.
different. And I very much feel that future us pulling me forward.
My future us is not afraid to hold hands with a grown man in public. My future us is proud of the person that I now refer to as my daughter chooses to be, and is not only accepting but kind of like exuberant about, and also is very happy with my wife.
So, when we walk into a room, these are all the people who are with us. These are people that like can have conversations with each other. Um, and these are, just all pieces that we embody. When I first did this exercise, I had this weird question I got after going through this, where all those things felt true to me, but I had this thought of who is guiding this ship? Who is who is this thing at the middle that's pulling the levers or pressing this button versus that button?
Hmm.
How how do you think about that for you? Who's guiding that?
Well, I mean, I I also was introduced through my friend Tony to this idea of another form of AI, which is ancestral intelligence, and which connects like so the wide awakes is very much I see um, the wide awakes like those of us who are in this process of awakening, which is you are clearly are wide awakes. I think in Buddhism they call us bodhisattvas, right? And so I am very much aware that I am you, and that we, if we do believe that there is one source, um, or many sources that are still one, um, we are here, right? And I don't know how to frame that. Like, I can't, I, I am living in your dream world, literally, and you're living in mine. So like this, and so I'm trying. So when I think about what's guiding us, it's like all of our ancestors that made all of these decisions, consciously, unconsciously, that brought us to this moment, are guiding us literally in this moment, and some of them might be the same person.
Hmm. So my last question, I loved your film "A Person Is More Than Anything Else," which is feels like a Adam Curtis movie about the Black experience narrated by James Baldwin. I don't know what you're thinking consciously making it, but it's amazing. And there's a clip in it, a short clip you have, where James Baldwin says something like, he knows what it means to be a black man in New York. He knows what it means to be a black man in London. He knows what it means to be a black man in Paris, seemingly suggesting they're very different things. And he sort of cut away. And after watching Question Bridge, I had wanted to ask you, what does it feel like to be a black man? And then after watching that, I thought maybe James Baldwin's way of putting it about how does it feel to be a black man in different places is like more accurate. And so just thinking about some of your work, I made me wonder like what does it feel like to be a black man in New York? What does it feel like to be a black man in Nairobi? What does it feel like to be a black man in America?
Well, what does it feel like to be a black man who doesn't believe in race with brown skin? um, it feels pretty surreal, right? Because race is someone else's fantasy, it's someone else's fiction, right? This idea that people are born with these dominant, innate kind of characteristics that dictate by the millions is absurd. It's comical. It's ridiculous. Yet and still, it's been so ingrained in me to kind of code people, like even coding you by like the the wisp in your hair, right? The thickness of your eyebrows, like um, the tone of your skin in summer. The fact that that we are forced to or have agreed to navigate a world and play this game that keeps us in opposition with our true natures. Like so, when I'm looking out into the world, I do not see a black man. It's only when people look at me or speak to me and interact with me in ways that show that they have been conditioned to see me, think of me, speak to me, hear me in a certain way, that I'm reminded of this. And the beauty of being able to go to um, France and go to different parts of the U.S. and go to even Burning Man and go to Nairobi and go to Hong Kong and go to Lima, Peru, is that like you start to get these different vibrations where you're like, wait, I'm supposed to be like, it's not the same. Like, it's like kind of walking through different topography. Like, it's like all of a sudden the my skin color, my texture, my gait means something different. It's like walking into different, every country, I can say as a black American man, feels like a different dimension. And often different cities where you're just like, wait, these rules don't apply. And that's what I found actually being living in France for a little bit was, and that's why so many African and Afro Caribbean immigrants excel in the United States in ways that a lot of African Americans don't, is that when you walk out of the force field of your societal bubble, you're free. Er. And so it's, we walk in and you're like, wait, I'm not like, I'd wind up places and I'm like, oh wait, I'm not supposed to be here. And it's like, oh wait, are they racist or are they just jerks? I don't know, but I'm already here. Whereas those who've been kind of systematically oppressed through the system would never even think to go there. And so my practice of liberation, self liberation, self emancipation is not just about uh, black, quote unquote, black people, but it's especially for me about European descended people who I believe have been trapped for the past century in this kind of blob of whiteness where, 100 years ago, a lot of people we consider white today would not have been white, right? They would have been ethnic Germans or, Armenians or um, Italians. And whiteness in the United States was a way for people to assimilate, to be safe. So you change your name, you change the way you speak, and you move out of a neighborhood and you move into this kind of amorphous blob that no longer has a culture or an identity, and therefore, in its sterility, is now safe. And so I'm hoping that we, okay, can start to embrace reinvest and re-engage in all of our complexities. And I'm very much inspired by like this quote by George Orwell, who says, "Who controls the past controls the future, and who controls the present controls the past." Right. So if we can start to think about, if we can build this present, which really is about all of us living in all of our complexities and bringing all of the people that are in us and with us to every table, maybe then we can start to reevaluate and take control of this past narrative so that the future is ours.
That's perfect. That's awesome. Thank you, my friend.
Well,
Thank you, my
thank
friend.
you.
So many great thoughts.
I'm sure most
Yeah.
of it's going to be edited out, but thank you anyway.
Yeah, totally. I'm gonna just splice together you saying something really incendiary